Don't board that plane! The desperate cry echoed through the crowded terminal, freezing everyone in their tracks. The billionaire CEO felt his blood run cold as he recognized the voice of his maid's daughter. Something in her terrified expression made him stop dead in his tracks. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The scorching sun beat down on the private runway in Palm Springs, turning the tarmac into a shimmering mirage. Maxwell Cray stood at the base of the boarding stairs, his silver aviator sunglasses reflecting the desert light while droplets of sweat threatened to betray his cool demeanor. The billionaire CEO adjusted his tailored suit jacket, a practiced smile fixed on his face as he prepared for what should have been his crowning achievement, Skylynx's historic maiden flight. Security personnel formed a human barrier between Maxwell and the crowd of eager investors, journalists, and industry elites who had gathered for the momentous occasion. Camera flashes erupted in rapid succession, capturing every angle of the sleek aircraft that promised to revolutionize private aviation. The gleaming white jet, with its distinctive tail design, stood as a monument to wealth and innovation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maxwell announced, his voice carrying across the runway through strategically placed speakers, "today marks the beginning of a new era in luxury travel." Applause rippled through the audience as investors jostled for position, their excitement palpable. The company's stock was projected to soar the moment the aircraft left the ground. Maxwell turned toward the boarding stairs, raising one hand in a final wave to the crowd. That's when it happened. "Don't board that plane!" The desperate cry sliced through the air like a thunderclap, instantly silencing the crowd. Every head whipped around, searching for the source of the disruption. Standing at the edge of the security perimeter was Lucia Rivera, a 14-year-old girl in a faded school uniform and battered sneakers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her eyes wide with urgency. Behind her, Elena Rivera, her mother, and a member of the cleaning staff, watched in horror, one hand pressed against her mouth. "There's something wrong with the tail," Lucia shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "The stitching pattern is misaligned. Please, you have to listen." For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. Maxwell stood with one foot suspended on the first step of the boarding stairs, his body suddenly rigid. The color drained from his face as his sunglasses slipped slightly down his nose, revealing eyes widened in unmistakable terror. Security personnel exchanged confused glances, uncertain how to respond to a teenage girl breaching protocol. Investors murmured nervously, their phones capturing the unexpected drama. Journalists who had come for a celebration suddenly sensed a much bigger story unfolding. In that suspended moment, as cameras continued to flash and the desert heat pressed down, the power dynamic on the runway shifted. A billionaire's carefully orchestrated triumph had been derailed by a child's desperate warning, and no one yet knew the true consequences of what had just transpired. Two burly security guards flanked Lucia Rivera, their hands firmly gripping her slender shoulders as they marched her across the tarmac. The teenager's desperate protests evaporated into the scorching Palm Springs air as the elite crowd parted, their designer sunglasses failing to mask their disdain. Behind them, Elena Rivera struggled against another guard, her cleaning uniform marking her as invisible to the wealthy spectators who now whispered and pointed. "Let me go!" "You don't understand!" Lucia shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. Meanwhile, Maxwell Cray stood frozen at the aircraft steps, composing himself before turning to address the restless press corps. The billionaire's practiced smile returned as he adjusted his silk tie. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're postponing today's launch due to unexpected weather patterns," he announced smoothly. The CEO gestured toward the cloudless blue sky with manicured confidence. "Safety is our primary concern at Skylynx." Inside a windowless security office, Lucia sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights, her sneakers barely touching the floor. The room smelled of antiseptic and intimidation. Across the metal table, three executives in matching charcoal suits exchanged glances of annoyance. "Miss Rivera," began Diane Westfield, Skylynx's head of public relations, "do you understand the seriousness of your actions today?" "There's something wrong with the tail section," Lucia insisted, leaning forward. "The stitching pattern is misaligned where the composite materials join." "It could tear apart mid-flight." The executives exchanged smirks. "And where exactly did a 14-year-old girl learn aerospace engineering?" asked one, not bothering to hide his condescension. "My grandmother taught me embroidery." "Patterns matter. Alignment matters," Lucia explained, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I've been watching the construction through the hangar windows during Mom's shifts." In an adjacent room, Elena paced frantically as a company lawyer outlined her precarious position. "Mrs. Rivera, "Your employment agreement includes strict confidentiality clauses," he explained coldly. "Your daughter's outburst has potentially violated those terms." "She believes what she saw," Elena defended, her accent thickening with stress. "Belief isn't evidence," the lawyer countered. "Keep her quiet, or the company will be forced to reconsider your position. Cleaning staff are easily replaced." Outside, journalists circled like vultures as Maxwell's team distributed a hastily prepared statement about a minor disturbance from an unauthorized individual. Security escorted them from the property while technicians discreetly examined the aircraft away from prying eyes. As dusk fell over the runway, Lucia and Elena were finally released with a warning. The teenager's shoulders slumped with the weight of disbelief, but her eyes remained defiant. No one had listened, but she knew what she saw. And she wasn't finished yet. Dr. Rajiv Menon slipped away from the commotion at the runway, his mind racing. The security team was still dealing with the teenage girl who had caused such an uproar, but something about her desperate warning nagged at him. In the quiet of his office, he replayed Lucia Rivera's words in his head. "The tail section stitching is misaligned by 3 millimeters on the port side." How could a cleaner's daughter possibly know about such a specific technical detail? The chief engineer pulled up the design schematics on his computer, zooming in on the tail assembly. For months, he had voiced concerns about the accelerated production schedule Maxwell Cray had demanded. "We need to be first to market," the CEO had insisted, dismissing Rajiv's requests for additional testing phases. The engineer rubbed his tired eyes, remembering how the girl had described the flaw with surprising precision. Her words matched his own unvoiced fears, concerns he'd documented in emails that had been consistently ignored by upper management. Perhaps her mother, Elena, had overheard his conversations with the assembly team while cleaning the offices? At 2 a.m, when the hangar stood empty and silent, Rajiv returned with his access badge. The security guard nodded sleepily as he entered, assuming the chief engineer was simply working late again. The massive aircraft loomed in the dim emergency lighting, its sleek contours casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He climbed the maintenance scaffolding, flashlight in hand, heart pounding against his ribs. What if the girl was right? What if his team had missed something critical in their rush to meet impossible deadlines? When he reached the tail section, Rajiv ran his fingers along the composite material seams. At first, everything seemed normal, exactly as designed. But then, as he moved to the portside junction point, his breath caught. There it was, a subtle misalignment in the carbon fiber weave, barely visible to the naked eye but potentially catastrophic under the stress of flight. "My God," he whispered, his voice echoing in the empty hangar. The boastful design team had overlooked it completely, focused instead on the aircraft's revolutionary fuel efficiency and luxury amenities. But this small flaw could lead to catastrophic structural failure at high altitude. The engineer sat down heavily on the scaffolding, his hands trembling. How had Lucia spotted what his entire team had missed? And more importantly, what would he do now? Reporting this would mean admitting the Skylynx wasn't ready, that Maxwell's Pride project was fundamentally unsafe. Rajiv took several photos with his smartphone, documenting the flaw from multiple angles. One thing was certain, that 14-year-old girl had just saved countless lives with her courage. Now he needed to find his own. The Skylynx public relations team assembled within 30 minutes of the incident, huddled in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Palm Springs runway. Press releases flew from laptops to news outlets describing unprecedented weather patterns that necessitated the postponement of the historic flight. Not a single mention of Lucia Rivera or her outburst appeared in any official statement. Maxwell Cray paced the executive suite, his silver aviators discarded on the mahogany table. "This is unacceptable," he hissed, slamming his fist down. "Some cleaning lady's kid nearly tanked our entire IPO." The Billionaire CEO gathered his senior leadership, their faces ashen as they contemplated the financial implications of the delay. "Sir, perhaps we should investigate the girl's claims," suggested one brave vice president. Maxwell shot him a withering glare. "She's 14 years old. What could she possibly know about aerospace engineering that Dr. Menon and his entire team missed?" He straightened his custom suit jacket. "This is about optics now. I want this buried. The official story is weather-related safety concerns, nothing more." The crisis management team nodded in unison, except for one woman who glanced nervously at her notes. "What about the Rivera family?" "The mother works for our cleaning contractor." A thin smile spread across Maxwell's face. "Perfect. Offer Elena Rivera a permanent position. Executive suites, Double her current salary, full benefits. Tell her it's a promotion for her exemplary service. He lowered his voice. Make it clear that her daughter's imagination could jeopardize this opportunity. 3 floors below, Elena sat in a sterile meeting room, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as a human resources representative outlined the generous offer. The woman spoke in practiced, sympathetic tones about how fortunate Elena was to receive such an opportunity. All we ask is that Lucia clarify her misunderstanding, the representative explained, sliding a prepared statement across the table. Children can be so impressionable. Perhaps she saw something online that frightened her? Elena stared at the document, which essentially portrayed her daughter as confused and attention-seeking. The promised salary would mean they could move to a better apartment, perhaps even save for Lucia's college education. Security, stability, everything she had worked for since coming to America. My daughter does not lie, Elena said quietly, pushing the paper away. If she saw something wrong with the aircraft, then something is wrong. The representative's smile tightened. Mrs. Rivera, surely you understand the position this puts the company in. Your employment status is precarious, Elena finished for her. I understand. She stood, dignity intact despite her trembling hands. But my daughter's integrity is not for sale. As she left the building, Elena felt both terror and pride wash over her. Their future had never been more uncertain, yet somehow she had never been more certain of their path. Taryn Vale's instincts had never failed her in 15 years of investigative journalism. As she paced her cramped apartment, walls plastered with news clippings, something about the Skylinks incident gnawed at her. The company's hastily crafted statement about unprecedented weather patterns reeked of corporate damage control. Weather patterns, my ass, she muttered, fingers flying across her keyboard. Public records revealed Skylinks had filed for 17 safety waivers in the past quarter alone, 3 times the industry average. More telling were the test logs, entire sections redacted, timestamps inconsistent, and signatures from inspectors who, according to LinkedIn, had left the company months earlier. The journalist printed everything, creating a timeline on her living room wall. The pattern was unmistakable. Corners cut, protocols bypassed, all coinciding with Maxwell Cray's aggressive push to beat competitors to market. But something was missing, the smoking gun that would turn suspicion into scandal. Taryn's phone buzzed with a message from a burner number. Cafe on 4th. 20 minutes. Her source, a former Skylinks quality assurance manager, chose a back table, eyes darting nervously around the nearly empty establishment. They made us sign NDAs thicker than flight manuals, he whispered, sliding a coffee cup between trembling hands. Anyone who questioned the accelerated timeline got a special bonus and a termination agreement. He described midnight design changes, pressure to approve components that failed stress tests, and an atmosphere of fear that permeated the company. How many others? Taryn asked. At least 7 engineers and 4 safety officers in the last year. All gone, all silent. Back at her apartment, the investigator connected new threads on her evidence wall, the picture growing clearer, a systematic effort to silence dissent within Skylinks, all to protect Maxwell's vision and the company's upcoming IPO. She paused at a newspaper photo of the runway incident. In the background, barely visible, stood a teenage girl in a faded uniform being led away by security. Lucia Rivera, the maid's daughter who had somehow spotted what teams of engineers had missed or been forced to ignore. Taryn circled the girl's face with a red marker. If the teenager had seen something critical enough to risk everything by screaming on that runway, she might be the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. The journalist grabbed her jacket and car keys. She needed to find Lucia before Skylinks silenced her too. This wasn't just about a faulty aircraft anymore. It was about a corporation willing to risk lives for profit, and a young girl brave enough to stand against them. The door to their modest apartment clicked shut behind them, sealing out the world, but not the weight of what had happened. Lucia Rivera slumped onto their worn sofa, her school backpack abandoned by her feet. Elena paced the small living room, occasionally peeking through the blinds as if expecting unwelcome visitors. They won't just let this go, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Men like Maxwell Cray don't build empires by letting 14-year-old girls challenge them. Lucia watched her mother's hands tremble as she prepared coffee in their tiny kitchen. The familiar routine seemed absurdly normal against the backdrop of their new reality. But, Mama, what was I supposed to do? Let all those people board a plane I knew wasn't safe? Lucia pulled her knees to her chest. I saw the misalignment. It was exactly like what Abuela taught me about pattern breaks. Elena sat beside her daughter, the couch sagging under their combined weight. I know, mi vida. I'm proud of you. She brushed a strand of hair from Lucia's face. But you must understand, people like us, we clean their homes, we serve their food, we're invisible until we're inconvenient. The evening news flickered on their second-hand television, showing footage of the disrupted launch. Lucia winced seeing herself, looking so small against the backdrop of the massive hangar and the gleaming aircraft. They're already calling me crazy, Lucia whispered, scrolling through comments on her smartphone. Someone posted our address in a comment thread. Elena took the device gently from her hands. This is exactly what I feared. Guilt crashed over Lucia in waves. Her mother had worked 6 years to secure the cleaning position at Skylinks. The job paid better than most, offered health insurance, rare treasures in their precarious existence. I've ruined everything, Lucia said, tears finally breaking through. Your job, our safety. Elena's embrace was firm, unyielding. No, you spoke truth to power. That's never a mistake. Later that night, unable to sleep, Lucia sketched the tail section from memory, tracing the fatal flaw over and over. Could she have been wrong? The doubt gnawed at her. What if her eyes had deceived her? What chance did her word stand against a billionaire's empire of lawyers, engineers, and media connections? A text message illuminated her phone. Unknown number. You were right. Not alone. Be careful. Lucia stared at the screen, heart pounding. Someone else knew. Someone inside Skylinks believed her. She deleted the message immediately, but the seed of validation took root. Perhaps her voice, however small, could make a difference after all. The security guard nodded sympathetically as Lucia Rivera slipped past him. 15 minutes, kid. That's all I can give you, he whispered, pocketing the spare badge he'd just handed her. It was the same guard who'd once let her try the simulator when Elena was working late, cleaning the executive offices. The massive hangar felt different at night, eerily quiet with only emergency lights casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Lucia moved with purpose, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't just a maid's daughter tonight. She was an investigator with a mission. In the fabrication area, she gathered discarded materials, aluminum sheets, composite scraps, and binding materials that had been tossed aside during the rushed production. Her fingers worked methodically, remembering the patterns her grandmother had taught her while embroidering. Look for the inconsistencies, Micha, her abuela would say. The truth hides in the spaces between stitches. Those lessons had trained Lucia's eyes to spot what others missed, like the subtle misalignment in the Skylinks' tail section that had made her cry out on the runway. The flaw was almost invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Working beneath a desk lamp she'd borrowed from an empty office, the teenager meticulously constructed a scale model of the aircraft's tail. Her hands moved with surprising confidence, recreating both the correct design and the flawed version she'd witnessed. The difference was subtle, a mere 3 millimeters of misalignment, but in aerospace engineering, such tiny errors spelled disaster. This is what they're hiding, she whispered to herself, securing the final pieces. Using her smartphone, Lucia recorded a simple stress test. She attached small weights to both models, gradually increasing the pressure until the flawed design buckled dramatically while the correct version held firm. The evidence was undeniable. Her hands trembled as she uploaded the video to a new anonymous account. The teenager hesitated before pressing post, knowing this small act of courage might change everything for her and Elena. Their modest apartment might not feel safe after this. The comfortable routine they'd built could shatter, but the alternative, staying silent while knowing hundreds might die, wasn't an option. For dignity, she whispered, echoing her mother's favorite phrase, and pressed send. Lucia carefully dismantled her workspace, tucking the models into her backpack. As she slipped out of the hangar, returning the badge to the guard with a grateful nod, she felt both lighter and heavier. The truth was now out there, beyond her control, traveling through digital space toward unknown consequences. What she couldn't know was how quickly Maxwell Cray's digital security team would respond, or how desperate they were to maintain their carefully constructed facade. The video disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Within 3 hours of uploading her scale model demonstration, Lucia Rivera watched in dismay as her anonymous account was suspended. the content scrubbed from every platform she'd shared it on. She refreshed the page repeatedly, but the evidence she'd worked so hard to document had vanished into digital oblivion. "They found it," she whispered to herself, clutching her smartphone with trembling fingers. She wasn't wrong. In the gleaming Skylinks headquarters, a team of IT specialists had already traced the upload to the company's own network. The security logs from the hangar revealed unusual activity during off hours, and Maxwell Cray's face had turned crimson with rage when informed. "Find whoever did this, and make sure they never work in this industry again," he ordered, slamming his fist on the polished conference table. "And get that video wiped from every corner of the internet." The Billionaire CEO wasted no time mobilizing his considerable resources. By morning, Skylinks' PR department had crafted a masterful counterattack. They released carefully edited footage of Lucia's runway interruption, cutting her words to make her sound incoherent and hysterical. The teenager watched in horror as news outlets picked up the story, framing her as an attention-seeking troublemaker with no technical knowledge. Sources close to Skylinks reveal the girl has a history of disruptive behavior, one reporter announced, while another questioned, how could a maid's daughter possibly understand aerospace engineering? Eleanor returned home from her shift looking more exhausted than usual. She placed her cleaning uniform on the back of a chair and sat beside her daughter at their small kitchen table. "They're asking questions about my papers at work," she said quietly, "and someone followed me to the bus stop today." Lucia felt a cold wave of guilt wash over her. "I'm so sorry, Mama." "It's not your fault," Elena insisted, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "But these people, they play dirty. They have money and lawyers and connections." Outside their apartment, a news van had parked, its satellite dish pointed skyward. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from unknown numbers, some supportive, others threatening. Former friends sent screenshots of social media posts calling Lucia a liar and fraud. The teenager pulled the curtains closed and turned away from the window. She had expected resistance, but not this coordinated assault on their lives and reputations, not whispers about her mother's immigration status spreading through their community like poison. "Maybe I should just say I made a mistake," Lucia suggested, her voice breaking. Elena took her daughter's hands. "The truth doesn't become a lie just because powerful people want it to," she said firmly. "Remember that." Dr. Rajiv Menon couldn't sleep. For the third night in a row, he found himself staring at his ceiling fan, the weight of complicity crushing his chest. The image of Lucia Rivera's determined face haunted him. At dawn, he made his decision. The coffee shop was nearly empty when Lucia arrived. She spotted Dr. Menon immediately, hunched over a table in the corner, nervously adjusting his glasses. The Rome engineer looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I should have spoken up sooner," he whispered as she sat down. "What you saw, you were right." His hands trembled as he slid a manila envelope across the table. "Internal memos. Maxwell ordered us to bypass 3 critical safety protocols to meet his timeline." Lucia's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. Handwritten notes in the margins showed calculations that had been altered, signatures that had been forged. The engineer had highlighted sections where the tail design, the exact issue she'd spotted, had been flagged by junior staff but dismissed by management. "They threatened to fire me yesterday," Dr. Menon confessed, his voice barely audible. 20 years of work, gone. But I can't be part of this anymore." He explained how Maxwell's obsession with being first to market had created a culture of fear. Nobody dares question him. Those who did disappeared from the company overnight. As they spoke, Lucia noticed a woman at the counter, pretending to read a newspaper while clearly listening to their conversation. Her heart raced until the stranger approached their table directly. "Taryn Vale," she introduced herself quietly, showing her press credentials. "And I believe every word you're saying." The journalist explained she'd been investigating Skylinks for months. "You're not alone," she told Lucia. "I've spoken with 7 former employees who raised concerns similar to yours." All were silenced, some with money, others with threats. Taryn offered Lucia protection through her media connections. "My editor has a safe house where you and your mother could stay if things escalate. We can get your story out properly, with evidence." Lucia hesitated, thinking of Elena. "My mom already risks so much." "Which is exactly why this matters," Taryn insisted. "Skylinks has a pattern. They find vulnerable people, people who can't afford to fight back, and they exploit that vulnerability." Dr. Menon nodded solemnly. "I've watched it happen for years. I just never had the courage you showed on that runway." For the first time since her outburst, Lucia felt something beyond fear, a fragile hope that perhaps the truth could prevail. With allies emerging from the shadows, her lonely stand no longer seemed impossible. "When do we start?" she asked. Elena Rivera stared at the envelope on their kitchen table, her hands trembling. Inside lay a glossy brochure for Westridge Academy, one of Palm Springs' most prestigious private schools, along with a letter guaranteeing Lucia a full scholarship through graduation. It was the third offer this week, each more generous than the last. "They think we can be bought," Elena whispered, sliding the papers away. The first had been a modest relocation package, a 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. Yesterday, it escalated to a management position at one of Maxwell Cray's hotels. Today, her daughter's education. Tomorrow, who knew? The phone rang. Elena answered cautiously, her spine stiffening as the smooth voice of Skylinx's legal representative filled her ear. "Mrs. Rivera, we're concerned about your visa status. There seem to be some irregularities in your paperwork. Nothing we can't resolve, of course, provided we all move forward amicably." The threat hung in the air long after Elena hung up. She'd been in America legally for 15 years, but fear crept in anyway. The power imbalance was too great to ignore. At school, Lucia found herself increasingly isolated. The girl who had once been surrounded by friends now ate lunch alone, scrolling through social media where her name appeared alongside words like attention seeker and troublemaker. Skylinx's PR machine had been ruthlessly effective. "My dad says your mom's going to get deported," whispered Thomas, a boy who'd invited her to his birthday party just months ago. "He says people like you should know your place." Lucia kept her head high, but each comment cut deeper than the last. That afternoon she found her locker vandalized with a crude drawing of an airplane crash. Back home, mother and daughter sorted through their mail, freezing when they discovered a plain white envelope containing a single photograph, their apartment building with a red X marked across it. "Maybe we should just stop," Lucia said quietly, tears threatening to spill. "We could take the scholarship. Say I made a mistake." Elena knelt before her daughter, taking her hands. "Mi vida, there are things in this world more important than safety or comfort. Your abuela taught me that dignity isn't for sale, and I've taught you the same." "But they're so powerful," Lucia whispered. "And yet they fear a 14-year-old girl with the truth," Elena replied, wiping away her daughter's tears. "That should tell you something about where the real power lies." That night, as threats and bribes piled up around them, Lucia clung to her mother's words and the values that had sustained their family for generations. The pressure to remain silent was crushing, but her commitment to truth remained unbroken. Despite mounting public scrutiny, Maxwell Cray announced a closed test flight of the Skylinx jet, insisting the aircraft was perfectly sound and that the previous delay had been merely precautionary. The test would take place at dawn, with only essential personnel present, a clear attempt to avoid further disruption. Lucia Rivera, Dr. Rajiv Menon, and Taryn Vale gathered on a dusty ridge overlooking the Palm Springs runway, watching through binoculars as the sleek aircraft prepared for takeoff. The teenager's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her focus. "They're really going through with it," Lucia whispered, her stomach knotting with dread. Dr. Menon nodded grimly. "Maxwell's too invested to back down now. The IPO is next month." Taryn kept her camera trained on the jet, documenting every moment. "If anything happens, we'll have evidence they can't erase." The morning sun glinted off the aircraft's polished exterior as it accelerated down the runway. For a moment it seemed the billionaire's confidence might be justified. The Skylinx lifted smoothly into the air, climbing steadily against the backdrop of desert mountains. "Maybe I was wrong," Lucia murmured, doubt creeping into her voice. Then it happened. At approximately 15,000 feet, the aircraft suddenly pitched left, its tail section visibly shuddering. Even from their distant vantage point, they could see the pilot struggling to regain control. The jet wobbled precariously, dropping several hundred feet before stabilizing. "Exactly where the stitching flaw is," Dr. Menon confirmed, his face ashen. "The stress pattern matches your model perfectly, Lucia." The aircraft made an immediate emergency turn, limping back to the runway at a fraction of its takeoff speed. Emergency vehicles raced alongside as it touched down, far too roughly for a normal landing. Within hours, Skylinx issued a statement attributing the incident to unexpected atmospheric anomalies and routine testing parameters. The company claimed the emergency landing had been planned all along, part of standard safety protocols. That evening, Elena held her daughter close as they watched the sanitized news coverage. "They're lying again," Lucia said quietly. "But we know the truth," her mother replied, strength in her voice, despite the fear they both felt. Later, Dr. Menon called with confirmation from a friend in the control tower. The flight data showed catastrophic instability in precisely the tail section Lucia had identified. The aircraft had come within moments of complete structural failure. "They're planning to patch it and try again next week," the engineer reported grimly. "Maxwell's ordering modifications but refusing to acknowledge the fundamental design flaw." Taryn's message arrived minutes later. "I've got footage. This is the proof we needed." Lucia stared at her phone, her young face hardening with resolve. Her warning had been right all along, and now they had evidence no one could ignore. Elena Rivera's hands trembled as she adjusted her cleaning uniform. After 12 years at Skylinks, she knew every corner of the facility, which security cameras rotated when, which guards took extended coffee breaks, and most importantly, which access codes were carelessly written on sticky notes by overconfident executives. "Are you certain this will work?" Dr. Rajiv Menon whispered, his usually confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. The engineer stood in the shadows of the maintenance corridor, clutching a small bag containing equipment to extract the data. "More certain than I am about our jobs tomorrow," Elena replied, forcing a smile. She checked her watch. 2 minutes until the shift change would create a 30-second blind spot in the security rotation. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Elena would enter as part of the night cleaning crew while the doctor waited in the service corridor. She would disable the secondary alarm using her legitimate access, creating just enough time for him to slip into the control room and extract the flight data key. "Remember, it's the black terminal with the blue stripe," Manon reminded her. "The logs are password protected, but the override sequence I gave you should bypass it." Elena nodded, thinking of Lucia at home, probably still awake despite promising to sleep. Her daughter had nearly collapsed from exhaustion after days of harassment and threats. This was for her courage, her truth. The security monitor blinked, signaling the shift change. "Now," Elena whispered. She pushed her cleaning cart into the main corridor, nodding casually at the departing guard. 3 minutes later, she was inside the control room, her heart pounding as she disabled the secondary alarm system. Dr. Manon slipped in silently, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm in," he muttered, plugging a small device into the port. "These logs. My God, Elena. They deliberately downgraded the AI stability system to cut costs. And look," he pointed to a simulation report, "this shows exactly what Lucia warned about. If that plane had taken off." The device beeped, signaling the data transfer was complete. Elena exhaled sharply as footsteps echoed down the hall. "Someone's coming," she hissed, quickly rearranging her cleaning supplies. "Put it in the bottom of the cart." The engineer slipped the precious data key into a hidden compartment beneath the garbage bags just as the door opened. A night supervisor peered in, frowning. "Just finishing up, sir," Elena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Outside in the parking lot, they transferred the device to Menon's bag. "This proves everything," he said. "The system failures, the cover-ups, the fact that your daughter saved lives." Elena stared at the small device. "And it might cost us everything." "Some things are worth that price," the doctor replied, his voice firm. "Truth always is." The countdown to Skylinks' initial public offering ticked relentlessly forward, transforming what should have been Maxwell Cray's crowning achievement into a global spectacle of a different kind. Financial news channels that once breathlessly anticipated the aviation event of the decade now ran split-screen coverage of protesters who gathered daily outside the company's Palm Springs facility. The once pristine hangar walls, designed to reflect Cray's minimalist aesthetic, now bore vibrant splashes of spray paint with messages like "Profits over people" and "Believe Lucia." Inside her modest apartment, Lucia Rivera sorted through another stack of mail that had arrived that morning. Letters from aerospace engineers, safety inspectors, and ordinary citizens poured in daily. The teenage girl carefully opened each envelope, her fingers tracing the international postmarks: Germany, Brazil, Japan, places she'd only seen in her school textbooks now reaching out to her. 3 more from pilots today, she told Elena, who was preparing a simple dinner in their small kitchen. Her mother nodded, the worry lines around her eyes softening slightly. The apartment that had once felt cramped now hummed with purpose. Handmade cards covered their refrigerator, and a wall map tracked messages of support from 6 continents. Meanwhile, Taryn Vale's explosive 12-part investigation had finally gone public. The journalist had meticulously connected the dots between rushed safety certifications, silenced employees, and the mysterious departure of 3 senior engineers in the months before the scheduled maiden flight. Her reporting ignited fierce debates across social media and news programs, with hashtags like Ground Sky Links and Lucia Speaks, truth trending globally. Corporate sponsors began quietly distancing themselves from Skylinks. The company's stock value fluctuated wildly as investors weighed potential profits against mounting evidence of negligence. Dr. Rajiv Menon remained under intense scrutiny, having been placed on administrative leave while continuing to provide crucial documentation to federal investigators. Elena received another call from the congressional committee staff, confirming their testimony date. She wrote it carefully on their calendar, her hand steady despite the weight of what lay ahead. "Are you ready?" she asked her daughter. Lucia looked up from a letter written by a 12-year-old girl in Michigan who dreamed of becoming an engineer. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I keep thinking about what Abuela always said about truth being like air. You can't see it, but you can't live without it." Outside their window, the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. In less than 72 hours, they would board a flight to Washington, D.C., where Lucia would tell her story, not just to lawmakers, but to the world. The apartment had become more than their home. It was now command central for a movement neither of them had ever imagined leading. The news exploded across every major network. Skylinks was scheduled to debut at the International Aviation Summit, where heads of state and industry titans would witness what Maxwell Cray had dubbed the future of flight. The stakes, already astronomical, now reached stratospheric heights. Under mounting public pressure, the Senate Committee on Transportation and Safety called an emergency hearing. The formal summons arrived at the Rivera's apartment on a Tuesday morning. Lucia's testimony was no longer optional, but federally mandated. Elena's hands trembled as she read the government letterhead. "We'll face this together," she whispered, embracing her daughter. The morning of the hearing dawned with a surreal intensity. News vans lined their street, reporters shouting questions as they emerged. A pro bono attorney provided by a civil rights organization escorted them through the chaos, explaining the proceedings in hushed tones. "Just tell the truth," the lawyer advised. "Your story is powerful enough." The Capitol's imposing marble corridors echoed with their footsteps as security personnel flanked them, keeping photographers at bay. Lucia clutched her mother's hand, her faded uniform replaced with a borrowed blue dress that hung slightly loose on her slender frame. Inside the chamber, television cameras tracked their entrance. The teenager's eyes widened at the semicircle of stern-faced senators, the packed gallery, and the row of executives in tailored suits. Maxwell Cray sat at the center, his usual charisma hardened into something cold and defensive. Dr. Rajiv Menon nodded subtly from across the room, his presence both reassuring and terrifying, his career hanging in the balance alongside their testimony. Taryn Vale sat in the press section, her notebook ready, eyes sharp with anticipation. "The committee calls Lucia Rivera," announced the chairperson, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses perched on her nose. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand one last time before the teenager approached the witness table. A court officer helped adjust the microphone as flashbulbs erupted around her. For a moment, the 14-year-old looked impossibly small against the backdrop of power and politics. "Please state your name and age for the record," the chairperson instructed. Lucia leaned forward, her voice initially soft, but gaining strength with each word. "My name is Lucia Rivera. I am 14 years old. And you understand you are under oath to tell the truth to this committee?" The girl nodded, then remembered to speak. "Yes, ma'am." From the executive table, Maxwell Cray's jaw tightened visibly. His attorneys whispered urgently in his ear, but his eyes never left Lucia, the maid's daughter whose courage now threatened everything he had built. Elena watched from her seat, tears welling, but pride overwhelming fear. In this moment, their modest origins became not a disadvantage, but their greatest strength. They had nothing left to lose but their truth. The congressional chamber buzzed with tension as Lucia Rivera approached the microphone. At 14, she looked impossibly small against the mahogany panel where committee members sat in judgment, their expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. "Miss Rivera," began Senator Hargrove, his voice dripping with condescension, "do you expect us to believe that a child with no engineering background noticed something that escaped dozens of qualified professionals?" Lucia's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "I've been watching my mother clean that hangar for 3 years, sir. I know every inch of those aircraft." "Your mother is a maid," another committee member interjected. "Not exactly aerospace credentials." Elena sat in the gallery, her eyes never leaving her daughter. The teenager straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from her mother's unwavering gaze. "My grandmother taught me embroidery when I was 6, Lucia continued. "She showed me that patterns matter, that one misaligned stitch can unravel an entire piece." The tail section had the same flaw, stitching that didn't follow the stress pattern. Maxwell Cray shifted uncomfortably in his seat as cameras captured his every reaction. His legal team passed notes frantically while the CEO maintained his practiced smile, though beads of sweat betrayed his composure. "And you expect us to take the word of a cleaning lady's daughter over America's most innovative aerospace company?" Senator Hargrove pressed. "You don't have to take my word," Lucia replied. "Dr. Menon can confirm everything." Dr. Rajiv Menon approached the stand next, carrying a small device and a stack of documents. The engineer's credentials were impeccable, his reputation sterling until he'd aligned himself with Lucia's claims. "The flight data key contains irrefutable evidence," he testified, connecting the device to the chamber's display system. "These readings from our test flight show exactly what Lucia described. Catastrophic instability in the tail section that would have resulted in disaster during sustained flight. Internal emails appeared on screen, revealing Maxwell's direct orders to bypass safety protocols for aesthetic purposes." The billionaire's face darkened as his own words condemned him. "I stake my 30-year career on this testimony," Dr. Menon concluded. "This young woman saved lives." Outside the chamber, crowds gathered around public screens broadcasting the hearing. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Lucia. The teenager who had once been dismissed as hysterical was now being hailed as a hero. As the session concluded, Elena embraced her daughter tightly. They had risked everything, their livelihood, their safety, their future, for truth. The cost had been enormous, but as they walked through the sea of cameras and supporters, Lucia understood that some prices were worth paying. Maxwell Cray sat alone in his corner office, watching his empire crumble in real time on 6 different screens. The stock ticker showed Skylink's shares in free fall, dropping 68% since Lucia's congressional testimony. His hands trembled as he poured his 3rd scotch of the morning. "Sir, the SEC is on line 2. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Maxwell ignored it, fixated on the footage playing on loop across news channels. His own face contorted with rage as Dr. Menon presented the damning flight data. The evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails revealed Maxwell had personally rejected the engineering team's safety recommendations, scrawling, "Too bulky, ruins the silhouette" across technical drawings. He'd demanded the sleeker, ultimately fatal design despite multiple warnings about structural integrity. Outside the Skylink's headquarters, protesters waved signs bearing Lucia Rivera's face, alongside the words, "She told the truth." The 14-year-old had become an overnight symbol of courage against corporate greed, while the billionaire CEO had become the face of callous disregard for human life. "The Department of Justice has opened a criminal investigation," his legal counsel announced, entering without knocking. "They're focusing on willful negligence and obstruction charges. We need to prepare for the worst." Maxwell slammed his fist on the mahogany desk. "This is absurd! A child and a disgruntled engineer shouldn't be able to destroy everything I've built." His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from board members demanding his resignation. 3 major investors had already pulled out, and a class-action lawsuit representing over 4,000 potential passengers was being filed that afternoon. The Federal Aviation Administration had grounded all Skylink's prototypes indefinitely. Manufacturing facilities across 3 states stood silent, workers sent home as inspectors combed through every inch of documentation. Each investigation uncovered new corners cut, more safety protocols ignored. "Sir," his assistant appeared at the doorway, ashen-faced. "The chairman of the board is here with security." Maxwell's empire, built over 25 years, was disintegrating in 25 hours. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence now slumped in his chair, watching as his portrait was removed from the lobby on a live stream. That evening, as he was escorted from the building, Maxwell caught a glimpse of Taryn Vale, reporting live from the sidewalk. "Sources confirm that Skylinks knew about similar flaws in previous models," she was saying. "Documents suggest at least 3 test pilots raised concerns that were systematically buried." The last thing Maxwell saw before the car door closed was a small group of maintenance workers in uniform, people like Elena Rivera, watching silently as he departed, their eyes reflecting not triumph, but the quiet dignity of vindication. Taryn Vale's office resembled a war room, walls covered with documents, photos, and timelines. She had been working tirelessly for weeks when her source finally delivered the bombshell: sealed court records from a Skylynx test crash 3 years earlier in Nevada. As she pored over the documents, her hands trembled. The aircraft had experienced catastrophic tail failure during testing, killing 2 pilots. "My God," she whispered, comparing the crash report diagrams to Lucia's model. The structural flaw was identical. The journalist uncovered a pattern of confidential settlements totaling millions of dollars. Families of the deceased had been silenced with ironclad NDAs and generous payouts. Maxwell Cray had personally overseen the cover-up, ensuring regulators received doctored reports blaming pilot error. The company had known about the tail design flaw for years, but prioritized aesthetics and cost-cutting over safety. When Taryn published her exposé, it sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Former Skylynx employees began reaching out, confirming that safety concerns had been systematically buried. The revelation that lives had already been lost due to the same defect Lucia had spotted transformed public perception overnight. The teenager wasn't just preventing a potential disaster, she was exposing a deadly corporate conspiracy. Meanwhile, Elena Rivera had become an unlikely labor organizer. What began as informal gatherings in her apartment grew into structured meetings at a local community center. Maintenance workers, cleaners, and ground crew, the invisible workforce that kept the aviation industry running, found their voice through her example. "They count on our silence," Elena told the group one evening, her voice steady despite her nervousness at public speaking. "They believe people like us have too much to lose to speak up." The movement spread beyond Skylynx. Workers at competing airlines began documenting safety violations and forming protection networks. Industry whistleblowers created secure channels to share information with journalists and regulators. What Lucia started had evolved into something much larger, a fundamental shift in power dynamics. Dr. Rajiv Menon, though blacklisted from major aerospace companies, found purpose advising these worker-led safety committees. His expertise validated their concerns and helped translate technical issues into actionable reports. The cost of silence became the rallying cry for this new movement. Memorial services were held for the pilots who had died in the covered-up crash, their names finally spoken aloud after years of enforced anonymity. Their families, freed from NDA constraints by the criminal investigation, joined the growing chorus demanding accountability. As federal investigators seized Skylynx records and computers, Maxwell Cray's empire continued its spectacular collapse. But beyond one company's downfall, something more profound was taking shape, an industry-wide reckoning that began with one teenage girl refusing to stay silent. Elena Rivera stood in the Skylynx Human Resources office, clutching the termination papers in trembling hands. The official reason cited was company restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. Her refusal to silence her daughter had cost her the job that had sustained them for years. "I clean your offices for 7 years, never miss a day," she whispered to the empty room after the HR manager left. "This is how loyalty is repaid." Across town, Dr. Rajiv Menon faced his own professional execution. His phone buzzed constantly with cancellations from aerospace companies that had once courted him. The industry's unwritten blacklist had claimed another victim. At home, he stared at his engineering awards, wondering if integrity was worth the sacrifice. The answer came when he received a handwritten note from Lucia. "You saved lives. Thank you for believing me." For 14-year-old Lucia, the cost was different but equally steep. Her social media accounts exploded with messages, some calling her a hero, others labeling her an attention-seeking fraud. Classmates whispered as she passed in hallways. The girl who once blended into the background now found privacy impossible. "I just wanted to stop people from dying," she told her mother one night, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want all this." Elena held her daughter close. "This is the price of truth, mi vida. Not everyone is ready to hear it." The sacrifices rippled outward. Former colleagues of Dr. Menon who had supported his testimony found themselves passed over for promotions. Maintenance staff who had corroborated Elena's accounts faced increased scrutiny and impossible schedules. Yet something unexpected emerged from the ashes of their careers. Letters and emails poured in from around the world. A flight attendant from Singapore sent Elena a handcrafted bracelet with a note. "You taught me to speak up." An engineering student from Mexico City wrote to Lucia, "Because of you, I'm demanding proper safety protocols at my internship." Dr. Menon received job offers from safety advocacy organizations and universities seeking someone who valued lives over profits. Elena found community leaders asking her to speak about workplace dignity. For Lucia, the support manifested in scholarship offers and invitations to youth leadership programs. The girl who once cleaned planes with her mother was now being asked how to make them safer. One evening, as mother and daughter sorted through another batch of supportive messages, Elena smiled. "We lost jobs, but found purpose." Lucia nodded, holding a drawing from a 7-year-old who had written, "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." "Maybe this is worth more than a paycheck," she whispered, pinning the drawing to their already crowded wall of support. The once gleaming Skylinks hangar stood empty, its pristine walls now covered with protest slogans and the ghosts of broken promises. Security fences surrounded the property, keeping out curious onlookers and journalists who occasionally still came by, hoping to capture images of Maxwell Cray's fallen empire. The runway where Lucia Rivera had once screamed those fateful words remained silent, weeds pushing through cracks in the concrete, nature reclaiming what hubris had built. In stark contrast, the modest apartment Lucia shared with her mother had transformed into something beautiful. Every surface bloomed with colorful letters from around the world. Drawings from children who called her their hero covered the refrigerator. Handmade gifts and mementos filled shelves that Elena had installed to accommodate the outpouring of support. Another package arrived, Elena said, setting down a parcel wrapped in brown paper on their kitchen table. Her hands, once raw from cleaning chemicals, now bore the calluses of different work. Organizing, writing, speaking. The mother had found her voice in the aftermath, becoming a fierce advocate for workplace safety. Lucia looked up from her notebook filled with engineering sketches. "From where this time?" "Japan," her mother replied with a smile. "A group of maintenance workers at an aircraft facility." The teenager carefully opened the package to find a delicately folded paper crane and a letter, thanking her for her courage. She added it to their growing collection, a global testament to speaking truth to power. 3 times a week, Elena hosted workshops for maintenance staff from across the region, teaching them about their rights and the importance of reporting safety concerns. What began as informal gatherings had grown into a movement, with workers from various industries seeking her guidance. Meanwhile, Lucia had been invited by a local community center to mentor young girls interested in engineering. She taught them basic principles using household items, showing them how to spot patterns and inconsistencies, the very skills her grandmother's embroidery lessons had instilled in her. "You remind me of myself at your age," Lucia told a shy 9-year-old who had correctly identified a structural flaw in their popsicle stick bridge project. Their neighborhood had embraced them fully. The same community that had once whispered about the troublemaking Maid and her daughter now pointed to their apartment with pride. Local businesses displayed photographs of Lucia's congressional testimony, and the community center had named their science room after her. "Did you ever imagine this?" Elena asked one evening as they walked home from a community dinner held in their honor. Lucia shook her head. "Never. I just couldn't let that plane fly." Her mother squeezed her hand. "And now look at all the people who can fly safely because of you." 1 year had passed since the Skylink scandal rocked the aviation world. In the heart of the same neighborhood where Lucia Rivera once returned home, in tears after her runway confrontation, a new aerospace workshop now stood. The modest building, funded by a coalition of engineering firms and education advocates, buzzed with activity each afternoon. Sunlight streamed through large windows as Lucia guided a group of 12-year-old girls through the basics of aerodynamic design. "Remember," she explained, adjusting a small model wing, "sometimes the smallest detail can make the biggest difference." The teenagers nodded, their faces serious with concentration as they measured and calculated. Elena Rivera watched from the doorway, pride evident in her smile. Though she no longer worked as a maid, she had found purpose coordinating community programs for service workers across Palm Springs. Her advocacy had led to improved working conditions and whistleblower protections for maintenance staff throughout the region. "My mother taught me that dignity isn't something anyone can take from you," Lucia told her students as they gathered around a workbench. "And Dr. Menon showed me that expertise isn't just about degrees. It's about observation and courage." Dr. Rajiv Menon himself visited occasionally, despite being blacklisted by major aerospace companies. He'd found renewed purpose teaching engineering ethics at a state university, his classes always overflowing with students inspired by his stand against corporate pressure. Taryn Vale's exposé had become required reading in journalism schools nationwide. Her investigation had triggered industry-wide reforms and safety protocols that bore informal nicknames like the Lucia Rule among aviation insiders, As for Maxwell Cray, his empire had crumbled under federal investigations and shareholder lawsuits. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence now avoided public appearances altogether. In Lucia's small desk drawer lay a folded Skylinks brochure, the glossy logo now faded. She kept it not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that truth needs no credentials. Sometimes she would touch it before speaking at schools or community events, grounding herself in the journey that had transformed her from a frightened 14-year-old to a symbol of integrity. "Miss Lucia," called one of her youngest students, holding up a carefully constructed model, "I think I fixed the stability issue." The teenager smiled, remembering her own makeshift models built in secret. "Let's test it together," she said, moving toward the wind tunnel simulator. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the neighborhood in golden light. Where silence and fear once reigned, voices now rose confidently. In classrooms and boardrooms across the country, the story of the maid's daughter who changed an industry had become a powerful reminder that courage, like flight itself, defies gravity.